Welcome, everyone. I'm Russell Schilling, the moderator for this panel. Winning Against Pandemics, Games as Essential Tools for Planning and Response. We've got a great group of panelists today who are joining us right now. With us today is Noah Falstein from the Inspiracy, Seth Cooper from Northeastern University, Francesco Cavallari, from the founder of Video Games Without Borders, and Rhiju from Stanford University. Hope you're all doing well today. I think we've got an interesting discussion to have today. The way we're going to do this is we're going to go around and each of us discuss what got us into being interested in pandemics and the ways that we are individually combating pandemics and have looked at this in the past. And then we're going to open it up for discussion. So we want to make sure we have plenty of time for you to enter your questions in the chat and let us discuss with you what we think about it and let you share your thoughts as well. To start off with, the reason I became interested in pandemics really dates back for a while. So in 1998, PBS broadcast an American Experience episode on pandemics for the 1918 pandemic. And I was really caught off guard by that because I'm kind of a student of history and trivia, and I'd never heard of it before. And so it really captured my interest in wondering why we had suppressed it. And really the reasons were multiple. Everything from the trauma it caused at the time to anti-sedition laws that Wilson put into effect that really censored the press from that time. Limiting a lot of the records. But as time went on, I started thinking about it from the military standpoint. I was a Navy officer for 22 years and an experimental psychologist. And I started wondering what would happen to us if we got hit with another pandemic. So what upsets me today about our discussions that we have in the news media is that you still hear many who say that this caught us off guard. But the honest truth is we were hit by multiple pandemics in the 20th century and one already in the 21st century. So, the Spanish flu we've been discussing a lot, and the so-called Spanish flu because it may well have been introduced in Kansas, which really had lots of casualties, enormous amounts of casualties, much worse than the one we're going through now. But then there was the so-called Asian flu in 1957 and the Hong Kong flu in 1968. We've had multiple scares, the swine flu in 1976, Russian flu in 1977, avian flu in 1997, and a minor outbreak of avian flu in 1999, among others. And so, if you go back even decades, the Chinese have had several instances where they've killed millions of chickens and other livestock out of fear that there were pandemics getting ready to start. So when I came into this and started my program in 2005, there were still already lots of people cautioning that another pandemic was on its way. And what this tells us is that even when this one passes, we need to make sure that we develop tools and processes so that we're ready for the next one, because there will certainly be a next one and one after that. The programs I started in the Navy that I'm about to discuss actually died shortly after the H1N1 scare in 2005 because the military quickly lost interest when the pandemic actually passed. But what I did is I started looking at this and I started asking what kind of planning tools the military might have, because what you find is that it really hit the military in 1918 particularly hard. About a quarter of the troops actually got sick. And so we were putting together tools on a variety of levels. One, we were saying, well, how do you control outbreaks in hospitals? So how can you really design your hospital and prepare your hospital for an outbreak? And how can you game through that to prepare staffs? So we created some agent-based models and other types of models that were looking at hospital outbreaks. We were also looking at troop outbreaks. What were the logistics issues in the military? How would you work on that? At the time, there were some high-speed computing, high-level computing simulations being conducted. But really what we found even today, and what I thought at the time, was that didn't make sense. As we found out today, you really don't know how deadly a flu is or a pandemic is until it hits you. You don't know how easy it spreads. You don't know how virulent it is, and you don't really even know the medium for which it spreads, whether it's airborne, aerosolized, person to person. So really what our philosophy was on this program was to do lots of quick and dirty simulations to really be prepared for a wide variety of scenarios. And I used some SBIR funds. I used some regular Office of Naval Research funds at the time. But we had some good starts on that. But unfortunately, and in 2005, after we got started, George Bush walks into the Rose Garden one day and announces that the military has everyone covered, that we have nothing to worry about, the military's pandemics. And of course, we did not. A few years later, after we scrambled and were doing some things, the immediate danger passed, and so did the funding for these programs. So what I'm wanting to do today is pass this on to my panelists and let them discuss how they are using games to attack pandemics and prepare us for the next one. And I'm also want us to discuss how we get this going and make sure that we are prepared for the next one after this one, so that it's not something totally new. So with that, I'll hand it over to Noah to let us know what he's been working on and what he can inform us on. Noah.
Thanks, Russ. So let's see. I've been doing games and health for, boy, over 20 years now. It's something that got me interested just as an extra challenge, I think, because everything you learn about making entertainment games applies, but there's a whole new set of challenges and interesting things you have to work in if you're doing games in this field. And I've worked on quite a few different projects with games and health, and in fact, since leaving Google about 3 years ago, it's been my main focus. But I have to say, pandemics itself weren't particularly a focus of mine until suddenly we find ourselves in the midst of one. I will mention, I was reading William Gibson, the guy who wrote Neuromancer. His latest book, Agency, is set in an alternate universe that is at the same time as ours. And at some point, without giving away too many spoilers, people from the future mention, oh yes, that was just before the start of the first wave of pandemics that caused massive deaths throughout the world. And he wrote this last September, so it was a little disconcerting to see that projection. He's been so good at projecting these sorts of things before. So when this pandemic broke out, I was certainly very interested in seeing if anything could be done. I was impressed at seeing that the Foldit people were on top of it almost instantly, and it's I think indicative of what you were saying, Russ, that those groups that have already made games that focus on these types of medical emergencies, or even things that are just relatively tangential to it, are much easier to pivot and to essentially do reskinning or just a new module in a matter of a month or two, as opposed to being able to start from scratch. But I was contacted a couple months ago from Professor Emma Lundberg, who's at Stanford now. She's a visiting professor there. And the games and health community may know her from an EVE Online health project that she did a few years ago, a big citizen science project. And she was looking at the possibility of doing some citizen science to address a pressing need that they have with annotation of the scans of COVID-19 patients. The type of pneumonia that has been causing a lot of problems and other damage to the lungs in COVID-19 shows up on fMRI and X-rays and various other types of scans somewhat differently than other types of pneumonia. And the people who are, the radiologists who are experts at spotting and annotating these things just are overwhelmed and don't have the time to annotate lots and lots of things unless they're absolutely critical. So the idea of recruiting citizen scientists to do that and using the same kind of citizen science game project that's proven very effective in the past, I thought was a really good one. And I'll just put in the plug that we're currently in a searching for funding phase. So anybody who knows of potential philanthropists or groups that might be interested in funding something has backing from Stanford. Besides Professor Lundberg, there's Matt Lundgren, who is another professor and doctor at Stanford who is working in radiology, and a lot of other experts on the medical side. And I'm the games guy to get things going. And I'm hopeful that this is a wake-up call for the games industry, and that we may take this as a challenge and figure out ways to set things in place so that, as you say, Russ, when the next one comes around, and certainly there will be others, then we're prepared to put our resources into play and see if there's something we can do. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thanks. Seth, could you let us know what you're working on at this point?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm Seth. I'm from Northeastern University, and thanks for the introduction. And my connection here is through the citizen science game Fold It. And so Fold It is kind of a multiplayer online game where the player and collaborating to kind of fold and now design protein structures. Essentially, proteins are little molecules that exist in the cell, and they're very important for kind of cellular processes and things. And the game actually started. We launched it in 2008, so it's been around for quite some time, and people have been. We've had. I think we can say we've had well over 500,000 people sort of play the game at this point. But the idea is it's sort of a puzzle game about proteins and trying to take a protein, and kind of a protein is this long chain of atoms, and you're sort of trying to fold it up or change the shape. The name of the game is Fold It, FOLDIT. And the website is actually fold.it, so it's it's online, it's free to play. There's actually a lot more information about the game and what we've been doing, particularly for COVID-19 on the website. But the gameplay is kind of like a competitive puzzle game where players try to fold up or redesign protein structures, and they sort of compete on a leaderboard, seeing who can get the highest score for the best folded protein structure. It started, again, I guess over a decade now. So it's been going on for a while, and we've sort of been continually trying to improve the game. It started back when I was at University of Washington, and since then it's really grown to be a collaboration between a number of different institutions, including University of Washington, still Northeastern, UMass Dartmouth, Vanderbilt, University of Denver, and other places. So it's really a big collaboration between a number of institutions now contributing. And a lot of the work related to COVID-19 now that we're trying to do is actually taking place with at the University of Washington in David Baker's lab, and Brian Kepnick is one of the people who's leading a lot of that. And there's sort of two kind of high-level approaches that the team has been taking to try to sort of take what Fold It can do and apply that to helping, maybe being able to help with the pandemic. One of which is actually trying to get players to design something that could bind to the spike protein of the virus, so that it could actually sort of essentially directly block the virus and how it can infect cells. And the other one is to try to develop something that might bind to something that could block kind of the immune system kind of over responding, which is thought to, I think, cause some of the damage from the disease and the virus. And so in both cases, we're basically trying to get players in the game to kind of design synthetic proteins that might bind to something that could help block either the virus directly or something that causes the bad effects of the disease, essentially. And so it's like a puzzle game where we give players some existing protein, maybe part of the virus, and they're given another protein that they can kind of redesign and try to fit the pieces together in the best way possible. And one of the interesting things I think about this is that if players design something really interesting in the game, then it's possible to actually synthesize that in the real world and test it out and see if it works. So we're still kind of in the early stages of this, But that's kind of the approach that we've been taking with Folded. And as Noah said, the game has been around for a while, but we sort of tried to design it to be fairly flexible so that, you know, we could put various different types of problems into the game. And so fortunately, you know, we were able to kind of adapt what we already had to be able to try to do something that might be relevant to the current situation.
Yeah, and I huge fan of Folded. So have you had any specifics that have come out yet? I've seen several calls of problems out on the internet to have people solve it. Have we had any wins yet?
Not yet. We have run a couple rounds of puzzles of players trying to design synthetic proteins. We just recently we've sent several of the player designs actually off to the lab to be tested. We've gotten some back for the sort of the immune response binder approach that I mentioned, but so far none of them have, as far as I know, none of the player designs that we've sent to the lab have sort of been effective binders. Yeah. But we're still sort of working on it, and we're getting information back from that and trying to use that to kind of improve the setup that we give to players, right? Give them different goals to try to achieve better results, basically.
Yeah, and I'm seeing we are already getting lots of one of the questions that came up is, who is your game aimed at? And my response was, it's citizen science, but you may have a better answer.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to, and I think in a way the audience is people who are interested in science, and that's largely who are in, you know, especially in like protein folding and protein science, right? Initially, a lot of the audience came from another project, Rosetta at Home, which was sort of this distributed screensaver project, where you could watch the proteins folding, but you couldn't actually interact with it. And so a lot of the initial players were, you know, people who came from that project. And so we've tried to sort of make the project, you know, it's theoretically accessible to people who don't have a background in biochemistry, right? So the audience is not biochemists, right? The audience is sort of more like the general public and people who are interested in science. And so the game does have a whole sequence of tutorial levels that's meant to teach the game and teach people who don't, you know, necessarily know anything about proteins or biochemistry how to play the game. And I think, you know, we've seen that that's been fairly successful, at least in, you know, many of the people, I think I can say most of the people who are playing the game and doing well don't necessarily have much of like a formal background in biochemistry, right, but they are interested kind of in science. And in fact, I think we've seen that, you know, many of them maybe have a background in some other area of science, like maybe computer science or that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think we may have lost Rhiju temporarily. Are you there? Okay. Well, let's see. Maybe he's coming. Up here he is. Yeah, and what I now that we've got Rhiju back, and I'll toss it over to him. For those of you who are really interested, they've also done some very interesting work with Folded in other areas like HIV and some other really fascinating work. So it's really worth looking closely at Folded. So, and with that, I'll hand it over to Rhiju Das.
Russ, thank you so much for having me here. I lead a game called Eterna, and I just typed the link into the chat for those of you who want to check it out. And our work is focusing on RNA vaccines. So as I think most of us recognize, this pandemic won't end until two things happen. A vaccine that works is authorized for use in human beings. And then secondly, that vaccine needs to be injected into basically everybody in the world. And RNA technology may be important in getting to this vaccine. mRNA vaccines have being the fastest into clinical testing and perhaps maybe authorized for use as soon as this fall or winter. But there's a bottleneck coming up. These vaccines are intrinsically unstable due to just intrinsic biochemical properties of RNA. And that precludes their manufacturing and distribution in pre-filled syringes, like what your flu shot goes out into. And so starting last summer, actually before the virus pandemic, I'd been in talks with folks in industry working on RNA therapeutics. And we had talked about stabilizing, making RNA therapeutics refrigerators stable. And we worked out a research plan that would involve high throughput experiments and deep learning and algorithmic designs. And we figured that we could probably get to the principles we need to make super stabilized RNAs on the timescale 3 to 5 years. And the idea is to try to make the RNAs fold up into tiny little packages that still code for the same proteins in the protein vaccine. And there's evidence from the literature that if you create these tiny intricate folds, the RNAs will be stable for much longer in refrigerators, and also still sustain their potency and perhaps even increase their potency as vaccines. So we had this plan going, and then the pandemic hit, and then we realized we don't have 3 to 5 years, we have 3 to 5 months. And so that's what led my lab to turn to the only platform I know of that can accelerate RNA design research that much, and that's this Eterna video game. So Eterna was launched in 2011, and it crowdsources currently intractable RNA design problems to anyone who has access to a web browser. And the key thing about Eterna is we take solutions that come in from players, sometimes we take the top rank by players, but then we then take each round of solutions and actually synthesize them in my lab at Stanford, and then my lab and colleagues here carry out high throughput experiments to test if the RNAs have the structures or functions that we're hoping for. And through this virtuous cycle of gameplay and experimental feedback over the last few years, we've successfully solved a string of problems that have eluded my lab and other experts and our deep learning methods, ranging from new diagnostics to the creation of new kinds of ribosomes, little tiny machines that make proteins, and new kinds of CRISPR therapies. And the project has resulted in over 20 scientific publications, several of which have been written by players themselves. And in fact, over the last 2 years, we've started to see papers that are written solely by players without input from nominally expert labs like me. When the pandemic hit around February, we realized turn towards this vaccine stabilization problem, and we launched the Open Vaccine Challenge. And on the one hand, we were somewhat prepared. We had an RNA design game ready to go. But on the other hand, there have been a number of interesting challenges that I think would be fun to talk about. So one thing was we'd never had an mRNA stabilization puzzle in Eterna, but some advanced veteran players actually stepped up and used our puzzle-making tools in Eterna to create these RNA puzzles. And that happened within a week. It was pretty amazing. Secondly, Eterna is a web browser game, but was not actually very well playable on a mobile platform. So we took serious steps to make that happen. I've got to say, it would have been really wonderful to have had a professional game studio helping us with this. In the end, we had to raise a lot of money to pay contract developers to help us make this happen. It's happening, but you know, I wish we had in place some partnerships with some legit game studios. So for people presenting the big game studios or mobile game studios, we'd love your help. The third thing we had to do was we and no one in the field had experimental tools to synthesize thousands of potential vaccines at once and then to test their potency in human cells. So we had to carry out quite a bit of experimental innovation at the time when Stanford was shut down. And so it was enormously important to have the backing of Stanford's leadership to give us waivers to do our research and to set up socially distanced so that my lab members and Maria Barna's lab could create these experimental methods. And so we just filed our third patent on a new experimental technique inspired by the Open Vaccine Challenge. And the other major challenge that we've had to overcome for Open Vaccine is, so we can make these vaccines. We think that players can design them. We think we can test them. We're going to end up, we hope, with, it looks like we are ending up with molecules that are more stable and still potent as vaccines in, but we need to get them tested in animals and we need to get them out to clinics. And so a major challenge for us, and I'm curious to see how the other panelists are dealing with this, is then we need industry partners to stand up clinical trials. And so that's been, I think, what's been taking the longest time is to legal paperwork. We have people who are industry partners who are interested in using our technologies and design rules. But we think we've finally figured that out. So in the next couple of weeks, we expect to be announcing the first of what we hope are several partnerships to stabilize legitimate RNA vaccines. We have been putting out our research into preprints. So the first one went out last month. It's what we think is the world's best RNA folding algorithm, as developed based on Eterna players' efforts over the last few years, including Open Vaccine. And later this week, we're going to announce the first computational algorithm to stabilize RNA vaccines, again, in collaboration with Eternal players. And we'll have 2 more preprints going out next month and the month after. And that's putting us in a position, along with the partnerships, so that if we're successful, I mean, I know it sounds like science fiction, but then the molecule that gets injected into potentially billions of people in the world could have been designed by a collective of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people working together on a scientific video game.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'd like to point out that some of the papers that come out of these types of studies more are authors on them than they have words in the paper, which I find very fascinating as well. So with that, we'll turn it over to the person who's coming to us from the farthest distance today.
Hello, everybody. Yes, hello, everybody from Spain. So I'm Francesco. I'm the founder of Video Game Without Borders. I am a game developer. So I've been doing games for more than 20 years now. And a few years ago, I founded Video Game Without Borders as a non-profit and a community to try to develop games that can really help on any field. That's where was the initial vision, like how can really maximize this potential of digital games for helping solving the problem of humanity. Then a few months later, the United Nations signed the Sustainable Development Goals, and that became our 17 goals and our frame of action as a whole. So at the beginning of this year, what we were doing was developing games, and we were mainly focusing on education because that's where we started, making educational games for refugees or for other contexts. And then the pandemic came in, and it didn't really change much the way we work because we are an international community but an online community. Everybody works from where each he wants. So it didn't really change our way of working. In some way, we were really used to working like with social distancing like now. But at the same time, we realized that there was something so important coming in that we had to step up and try to do something to help. We didn't have any scientists in the team, in the community. So what we did, what we can do, we can develop a game that is entertaining. We can still help use the game to repeat, recap, and be sure that people understand well all these new concepts that have been thrown at us, like social distancing. Most of the people never heard about them before. So, and that's one point, but then the other big things we have in mind is that it's a game. We need to be able to raise funds for the initiative and for the emergency, because right now there is an health emergency, there is a social emergency going in, and also a financial economic emergency. So there's this crisis is pretty big. So the game has been designed from the beginning in order as a free game, because that's more or less the way we work. All the games we release are free, and most of them are open source. But we invite our players to donate to initiatives that are fighting against COVID-19. So when we think about the game, it was a challenge to make a game like that, because as I said, we were in a community, and the initial idea came out the very first day of the lockdown here in Spain. So I was at home and I said, this is happening, we have to do something. And I asked the community, what can we do? What about making a game? And then several people joined the idea, liked the idea. And in a few days, we had a team, like a full team, ready to work on it. I mean, they are volunteers, so we had part-time people and different profile, but we had a full team available. So we started working on a concept, and we were able in the end, with only volunteers, to develop a full game in 1 month and a half. That is quite amazing for me, that I come from bigger production that it takes ages. And in this case, it was really fast. The game is this one. It's called Flatten Island. And it's all about the concept of flatten the curve. So you have to manage an island. It's a fantasy island in which you are the governor. You are by chance, because you get drawn as the governor. And with a few advisors, you have to take decision. And with your decision, day by day, you have to rule the island and manage the. It's not a scientific game, but it's all based on the knowledge we were acquiring during the pandemic, as normal people, as anybody else. So everybody of us, and sure you as well, have learned a lot about pandemics during this latest month. And so we are asking you to prove it by managing a pandemic with a very simplified model and with a touch of humor, because, as I say, we are not trying to use a scientific approach in the game. The game was launched initially a few weeks ago only in Spain, just to test, and everything was fine. And now it's available worldwide. It's already been translated thanks to many translators, again, volunteers translators as well. Now it's available in 19 languages. Soon it will be more than 20. And it's available for free. As I said, you can have it on Android or play on the web on itch.io. We are supporting different initiatives. In the way the game, the game itself brings the player, asking them to donate, and then we are running a campaign for the World Health Organization. We are running a local campaign, like national campaigns. We are just starting yesterday a new campaign in Mexico with a partner over there, and we have partners in Spain, in Italy, and we are looking for more and more initiatives to support all around the world. Not all the initiatives are about health. Some are about the economic crisis, helping vulnerable families who have lost their job because of the situation and their income. And the game itself is designed as a simple tool that can be easily adapted. So, as I said, we design it completely without scientists, but we could easily make a game version that is a very scientific one. We just take a scientist on board, change the model that is behind it, and change maybe the question and the decision you have to take, and the game will run smoothly as well. In the game, you have 5 key variables to control. Your cash, your money, the public opinion, because if they're not happy, they will kick you out of the governor's seat. The number of patients in the hospitals, and the number of the capacity of the hospitals themselves. But at the same time, you are investigating on the vaccine. So once you get the vaccine, it's how you win. That's the main point. The game is available for free, so just go on flattenisland.org. I'm asking you to try the game, play for free, and my call to action is really play the game, donate if you can, choose the initiative you want, donate if you can. If you want to do more, you can join our team, join our fundraising team. In example, the campaign we are running for the World Health Organization, you can join the fundraising team and share. Or you can suggest us another initiative to support with the game itself. And if you're a developer, you're a scientist, or someone who really believes, you want to join the community, come to Video Game Without Borders. We are a community, and we develop games on all type of subjects. Now we are focusing on pandemic, but we can help other projects. We always do in collaboration. So Rhiju, I was listening about you struggling to find developers on how to make things. I mean, here we are. So if you want, let's talk about how to make happen, how as an organization or some of the people may help on the project, and then we are happy. That's
Francesco,
what we are
that's
there
great.
for. Thanks a lot.
I actually had a question for Francesco. When you showed the game for Flatten Island, it does seem geared potentially towards kids. It has a cartoon character, so
it has a cartoon style, but it's not for kids. It's
also for kids.
I mean, it's really designed. It's also for kids. I mean, because the game has a lot of text, so it's a really decision-making game. I can even show you the game. I mean, it's a simple thing to do. So it's based on several questions. Every day you pick an advisor, and he will propose you one decision. So let's make it start a new game. So here we are. I don't know how much you can see it. So we are on day 1. And I have few advisors. Each one is specified. This is investigating the vaccine. This is the managing the hospital. This is, is there some like the Dr. Fauci in the US, like managing the pandemic itself. Say I want to take this one, and this is the process. Every day, 2 options. Each decision I take has an impact on the key variables of the game. So since there's a lot of text, it's mainly targeting adults. But we decided for a cartoonish style because we thought it was the best for this kind of game. We had to be very careful with the tragedy that is happening. So we didn't want in any way to be disrespectful or offensive for anybody. And we thought about setting up in a fantasy island, a fantasy world with cartoonish animal characters. It was an easier way to get it far away from the real world, but still passing the key messages that we
That's
want.
very helpful.
Yeah.
One of the challenges for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the challenges
do you
for
have
us is
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Rhiju.
I just wanted to follow up. I think one of the challenges for in Eterna has been it would take quite a bit of investment to make the site COPA compliant, so that kids at 13 and under could participate. Our partnership with Nova let us create a sandbox version that is COPA compliant, but that's the kind of thing where advice or development, particularly from these other panelists who have a lot of experience in getting games to everybody, that would be very helpful for us.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, on our case, it was a bit simpler because it's a single player offline, so we don't have such complexity. But it's true that it's something you have to be very careful about.
And do you have a science denier player character in your game, Francesco? Oh, we're freezing up a little bit. So let's move on.
You can be free to choose to ignore your advisors.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we're breaking up a little bit, Francesco. Okay, let's while he's getting he'll be coming back on shortly, but we'll start opening up for questions. But I have one general one as we let people start typing in their questions, and that's, this is kind of one of those areas, especially Eterna and Foldit, but I think Noah's work as well, where these are kind of non-traditional places for games to live. How are people outside the gaming community accepting what you guys are doing at this point?
Well, I think, at least in the case of Foldit, the game has been around for a while, and I think one of the first things that we had to do was sort of show that this kind of crowdsourcing or citizen science approach could actually work, right? Like it was not sort of predetermined that players would be able to solve challenging problems that were hard for computers or hard for experts or that kind of thing. So, I think that was something that we had to do kind of early on, or one of the sort of our first goals was to kind of show that, it would be useful to have a citizen science kind of approach to biochemistry and protein folding and protein design. And I think, I'd like to think that we've demonstrated in several cases where players have been able to be helpful. Early on, one of the big kind of earlier results that we had was the players were able to help solve the structure of this protein, the Mason-Pfizer monkey virus retroviral protease, which
rolls off the tongue.
I know, yeah. Which some collaborators who we were working with, they had been working on trying to solve this crystal structure of this protein for many years, and it had been kind of a sort of a failure case essentially of some of the computational methods that had been developed. But we gave that to the Foldit players, and it was actually a team of Foldit players, several of them working together, who were able to actually come up with something that could be basically confirmed as the right structure for that particular protein. And I think that was one of the kind of the early sort of successes of Foldit that gave some confidence the sort of the citizen science approach in biochemistry could be promising, right, and that kind of thing. And since then, we've had a number of other cases where the Foldit players are either able to come up with something that's maybe a little bit better than experts or algorithms were able to come up with, or some creative kind of solutions to problems as well. So, yeah.
I think one of the challenges is with whether it's citizen science or a sort of head-on approach of creating games, much like Francesco is, that address the problem directly. A lot of it comes down to funding. what we have on to benefit us is that unlike most commercial games, we don't necessarily have to aim at hundreds of millions or even hundreds of thousands of players. Sometimes 10,000 motivated players is sufficient to actually get some really wonderful things done.
Right.
But on the other hand, even when we're not technically competing with these commercial games, the fact that people are used to the production quality of these games that have millions of dollars in their background makes it really hard to make a very simple cruder looking game that can compete on those levels and that can capture people's attention. And that's really the problem I see. And primarily as a game designer, I'm constantly looking at different approaches we can use. It's interesting to me that there are several games out there, EVE Online and gosh, I forget the other. What did Civilization do? There's some existing big commercial games that have managed to sort of piggyback other science projects. Yes,
Borderlands 3, right?
Yeah.
So, and that the fact is, within the games community, within the entertainment game developer community, there are a lot of people interested in this, but you need to get somebody at a very high level to be able to authorize it, because of course, even using an existing code base, it's very expensive to make it work right.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not a program manager anymore, Noah. So
that's a good point. I mean, DARPA has actually been one of the best investors in these sorts of things.
Oh yeah, so I've worked indirectly with a bunch of you, probably in your orbits in the past. So it is a huge problem. So again, when I was in government, I was using SBIR heavily to try to get to some of these issues. But even then, the money's not really up there high enough to really get to those higher level game quality, professional game quality applications. So I agree. It's something we need to put more effort into.
I just put in one point of encouragement, and that I've been working for 11 years now with Adam Ghazali and the Achille people. And of course, it was big news that just a few weeks ago, they finally got their FDA clearance for a game to treat ADHD. And I am hoping that will open more, funding resources. They needed tens of millions that they raised in order to even make the game and wait through that whole long multi-year FDA process. But having shown that it is possible to do, that's at least one of the key points that I'm very optimistic over the next few years. We're going to see more and more, big pharma companies or insurance companies being willing to start funding game development when there's a specific outcome like that that's possible.
Right. Yeah, that's the ADHD game really is exciting. So I think that could be a breakthrough for many of us in this area. But it again, getting that type of funding is just an amazing feat in itself. We do have another question. We have on the board from Jennifer Werner. Have there been any thoughts to branch out the indie game into the indie game console world? Might be able to win funding through Indie Games Awards.
Developing. I mean, I come from the games industry. I was doing commercial games before. So developing for console, usually it's much more expensive than developing for web or for mobile. But it's possible. Technically, it's possible. It's a matter of funding. It's a matter of expertise, because as Rhiju said, it's difficult to find good developers, and it was web-based game. Now we're talking about console, so the number of developers out there, it's even smaller, and there are many of them, but it may not be hard to find the right one motivated to work on this kind of projects. But it's possible. We never did it as Video Game Without Border, but it's part of the vision we have for the future.
Yeah. Do you think that's even possible to do for the Eternas and the Foldits?
It could be possible. I mean, we've thought about maybe sort of console ports at times, but it would probably be switching for Folded. I think things like switching from mouse and keyboard to like a controller would probably be a decent amount of work to sort of figure out how we would redo the UI and all the sort of menu systems and that kind of thing in the game. And we oftentimes, even if we had done the sort of upfront work to do kind of a port, there's a lot of work maintaining as well, because the project we're constantly updating the project, and posting new things that people can do and running puzzles and that kind of thing. And, just the additional sort of upkeep work to support each additional platform can be, we expect it would be reasonably large, as well especially as the platforms become sort of more different and have different interfaces and that kind of thing. But,
there's a good precedent for this, though, in distributed computing platform, which was started by Vijay Pandey at Stanford in 2001. A few years later, they ported their game to PlayStations. And in fact, there's simulating protein folding through molecular dynamics. They took advantage of the graphics cards the super high performance graphics cards that were in PlayStations. And that was a huge win. For that project, I think actually the majority of their compute has come from PlayStations. So I think that's a precedent that we could look to. I think Fold and Eterna would both play beautifully on consoles. Yeah, and so if anyone out there is a console developer studio, and if you want your millions or tens of millions of people to be doing something for COVID, then this is the time.
We're also interested in porting to VR, maybe something we talk about a lot.
That's very natural, right? Yeah.
But because it's a three-dimensional protein structure interacting with, and if you could actually reach in 3 dimensions and interact, we think it could be
AR would be really cool for that too.
And just AR would be fine. Yeah, and I think in Folded's case, they're also solving experimentally the structures of proteins. In Eterna, we are now also solving 3-dimensional structures of RNAs, and we can actually now do it on the timescale of a day. Like, this is shocking, but this is where we are in terms of molecular structural biology. Cryoliquid microscopy is a relatively new technique where we are literally solving the structures of, on the timescale of a day. And we are taking some solutions from players, this is pilot, and then able to get beautiful 3-dimensional maps where you can see if your molecule is folding up correctly. So that's getting to the point where AR or VR could be a huge win for people designing in 3D and getting feedback in 3D.
Cool.
I also want to warn people, though, when as a freelance designer, I get people coming to me with ideas, and so many people go to AR and VR right away because it's the coolest thing. And I completely agree. For a 3-dimensional protein, there's a lot of reasons to believe in that, but a lot of people go straight there, even when it's actually not a very good fit, and they don't realize that it's more expensive to develop for that sort of thing than a flat screen game, and B, much more importantly, you can have 100 million people all doing stuff on their browser, and maybe a couple 100,000 who are interested in doing it on their VR or AR system, and that'll change eventually, but those numbers are not going to change quickly. So a PC or mobile I think is definitely a good way to go in the next few years.
Yeah.
Anyway, just one note, but when we talk about console, don't forget the Nintendo Switch. There is a touch screen there that could be still used, even if it's not the same as, but it's easier to port from mobile or web than to Switch than.
It all blurs, and Google with Stadia, it becomes hard to define exactly what kind of platform you're even on, and that's a company that's also doing a lot of health research. So I'm hopeful that there will be ways of kind of breaking through here, but it's really hard getting through the inertia of the way that people are used to doing business into some of these radically different models that often are not all that business oriented, but are public health oriented. You can get a government theoretically to pay for it, but getting a government to fund game development through a game company, I've seen Mark Delora has commented, and he knows how frustrating that can be.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one question. Just go ahead. Well, I had a question for the rest of you. Virtual panels. Okay. One question that no brings up is how have been your experiences or have you thought about having industry partnerships where the games really do create commercially valuable products? I mean, clearly we're entering that era now.
Yeah.
For Eterna, a lot of the stuff we're doing, a lot of my time is being filled with discussions with IP experts and Stanford's technology transfer lawyers to figure out a way to get Eterna players compensated for skills that might be commercially valuable. And so there is this possibility of this new kind of gameplay that is coupled directly to creating drugs and vaccines and diagnostics. Have you had experience with that? Have you,
I've had a little experience reaching out
model.
in some cases. And as I say, it is fairly frustrating because a lot of what we need to do, we need to feel our way through. We don't actually have an example that we can present to them. And it's a chicken and egg thing.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think that companies like Crowdflower and Kaggle have some kinds of models that are worth looking into, but they don't quite fit because particularly with the games like Foldit and Eterna, the ethos is one of open science, I'd say. And so we haven't forged that model yet. It's, I think, a big challenge for our community.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk with Humble Bundle and have them, creating a specific bundle for, citizen science games and people can play, something like that. I mean, I think nobody has found yet the right business model or the best business model, let's say, but it's out there. I think
it's a huge opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel we are not very far away.
Okay. Well, let me ask a slightly different question. And then again, I encourage, since we're coming up on time here shortly, and if there are any more questions, please throw them up. So, especially for Francesco and Rhiju's application that was ported over to PBS on their Nova Labs site, education's a really big part of these games, and where you can actually teach quite a bit. And I know Seth knows that I've worked with Zoran Popic a lot on education games. So, what do you see as that space going forward, kind of for the social impact of education on these games? So, I mean, one of the things we discussed a lot over the years was Eterna, iWire, and Foldit. You don't really need to know a lot about the actual microbiology to do them necessarily. So how do you combine all of those to get the education value in?
You do pick it up while you play, right, Seth? Right. I should let Seth answer it, because Foldit has published these really beautiful papers that involve collaborating with college classrooms. So
and that was one of the, like you say, I think the players sort of pick up the biochemistry or the domain science kind of indirectly, because we have this sequence, we have these tutorial levels that are meant to kind of play the game, but we really made them to sort of play the game, or to teach how to play the game. Not, it wasn't really ever our initial goal to sort of teach biochemistry, right?
Right.
And I kind of have a, sort of a theory maybe that, maybe one of the differences between what we might call like educational games and what we might call citizen science games is, in educational games, you're sort of kind of explicitly designing for transfer of the knowledge outside of the game into like a different context. Right. Whereas in citizen science games, generally speaking, we really only, are teaching players to apply what they know within the game itself, right? But people do pick things up and learn outside the game as well. So I think, I guess as I was saying, we didn't really design the game to be like for education, but people have sort of picked it up and used it in the classroom, and maybe as kind of a more fun kind of introduction, assigning people to play the tutorial levels perhaps, to learn a little bit or get an introduction before they go into something more kind of like formal, a more traditional kind of classroom. And we did one of the collaborations we had with Scott Horowitz. He used the game in one of his classrooms to sort of teach people about fitting structures to electron density, and we did kind of a comparison of he actually, as I understand, he gave some of his students a structure to try to fit into electron density. They ended up improving upon, I believe, sort of like the quality of the structure that was sort of publicly available in the PDB of that particular structure. And so we did a little bit of follow-up work on that, comparing, the students in the classroom using Foldit to, the Foldit players themselves and experts. And, it turns the Foldit players, in that case, at least, I think they did quite well compared to sort of the other techniques for fitting protein structures to electron density. But actually, Scott is currently, working more on trying to explicitly design a version of the game that is educational and seeing, what kinds of Yeah,
Well, when I was STEM director at Department of Ed, I mean, what we were really interested in is really figuring out how to make learning more active. So even using games like yours or Francesco's or even Noah's in various ways to actually make the students feel like they were actually involved in the research process. So, working them into an education curriculum, which the Nova PBS site does for Eterna a bit, which very nicely. So I think
as a commentary on this, I think this area is really underexplored.
Yes.
And so I read a review of scientific discovery games last year where there's a ton of literature addressing the educational impact of video games in classrooms, particularly at the elementary K-12 settings. But I couldn't find any that rigorously evaluate impact of scientific discovery games in classrooms. So a single paper that did this to my satisfaction.
Right.
So
me neither.
I mean, that's a big opportunity for education and sociology research. But more than that, like in terms of having a big social impact, I think scientific discovery games, because they're a low barrier to entry, we have a chance of addressing inequalities in STEM education as well. And so
absolutely,
the partnership that I'm actually most excited about on Eterna right now is one with Prairie View A&M, HBCU near Houston. And it turns out one of the assistant professors there in sociology is one of the top 50 Eterna players. And so he reached out to us earlier this year and said, can we get something set up at PVMU? So we're working closely with Dr. Ronald Lorenzo and Dr. Gloria Regisford there to integrate Eterna into their advanced genomics course. And this is a huge win-win. Okay, first of all, the students who are coming in these classrooms, they are having, I would say, disproportionately affected by COVID-19 and the university shutdowns. But they are very excited now to take part in creating this new these new course modules and assessing their impact. But even cooler, like what we're planning to do is at the end of the course, instead of having students give like poster presentations, we're going to help them create videos and puzzles on Eterna that will then become like our flagship videos. And there's even a chance to go onto Wikipedia pages for CRISPR therapies or for RNA vaccines. Like this could really become the front, the media front and the puzzles that people see when they actually enter Eterna. And it's cool. The videos are going to be, they're going to be in this case Black and Latinx voices. Our developer team is flipping to be mostly minorities. Like the whole thing is flipping. So I think there are massive opportunities here also in the next year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
And on this, I want to mention one thing. We're switching a bit on the education side. We are member of the Global Education Coalition that the UNESCO started right up to address the COVID-19 education crisis. And there are many ministries of education around the world interested in finding solutions. I was the other day in Nicole, in the Caribbean area, and there were many professors of universities telling, hey, I mean, okay, there's many resources for K-12, as you mentioned, but how do we keep on going with, STEM education or in higher education or university level education? There's fewer solution for that, and I think your games could be a wonderful element. Usually focus on a specific point, on a specific topic, but still it can bring a lot of value. So that's what I wanted to mention.
Well, I think we're coming up on time. I think this is a very, if anybody has any final thoughts they'd like to share. I really thank all of you for putting the time into to this today. I think there are many more discussions to have. The education one, certainly we've weren't expecting to stress test our ed tech capabilities like we have over the last several months. But as somebody who has invested in ed tech, I can tell you it's not surprising what the outcomes have been. And hopefully we can fix these problems before the next pandemic comes along as well. But I encourage the listeners out there or the viewers to really think about their own games and ways that they can approach these topics as well, because I think this is really an untapped area, not only for education, but for actual planning and problem solving. So with that, I think we'll be signing off.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Russ.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.